And welcome back to part 2 of this week's Vipercast, presented by the Fantasy Points Media Group. Head over to fantasypoints.com right now. Use promo code VIPER22 and get 10% off that Fantasy Points subscription. One of the best bang for your buck type of things out there. You got John Hanson, Graham Barfield, Joe Dolan. I mean, I go on. Scott Barrett, some of the best out there. Kaplan, Coswell there. Everyone, you name it, they're all there. Head over there. And you get Major there too with Nick Scripp every Sunday during the season, doing a little bit of something there every day, breaking down the day that's about to happen. So let's get right into this. A little bit of the behind the grind here right now. We're going to get to know Scott Pianowski here in a second here. But Scott, say we're at the Fantasy Football Expo. We're going down into the Blanda room there. Maybe we even get bumped up to the Jim Brown. Who knows? Probably not us. But hey, we're getting down there, and all of a sudden they got some fog machines. They get some strobe lights, and they go, Scott, we need your entrance music. What is that music to cue you up?
Probably some 70s rock, probably some Zeppelin, Stones, Who, that type of thing. But I like a lot of different music. I like a lot of 80s college alternative music, a lot of 90s stuff. There's some stuff 2000 and up that I like too. But I'm a 70s and 80s rock and alternative new wave guy.
Nice. Off camera, before the show, we talked a little bit about you growing up in New England and being a hockey guy. But
Sure.
we all play sports growing up like that. Sports is really important for just the maturation of like a good human being, I think, in my opinion. But what did you play? Who were some of your favorite teams and players? It could be any sport.
Yeah, I grew up in New England, so I rooted for all the New England teams. Huge Boston Bruins fan, huge Ray Bork fan, baseball, huge Dwight Evans fan. Doug Flutie's BC run was during my childhood, so
Nice.
I really enjoyed that. Watched a lot of college hockey growing up, which was a blast. And also when I got into college and then started getting in the newspaper game, I got to see. I covered a ton of college hockey, and I got to see the University of Maine hockey team when Paul Correa was a freshman. The best team I've ever seen. They only lost one game. Correa had 100 points in something like 39 games or 42 games, whatever he played. Won the Hobie Baker as a freshman, which is the college Heisman Trophy. Nobody had ever done that before. And when he got on campus, he was 17. I mean, he still had acne. And one of the most thoughtful interviews, a really smart guy. Both of his parents, I think, were principals. And I always followed his pro career with interest. And I was really happy when he ended up in the Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, his career ended a little prematurely. He had some concussion issues. But Paul, you just should have seen Paul Correa in college. Just the puck was always glued to his stick. And what's more fun? I mean, you guys are dynasty players. What's more fun than when you get in on somebody before the rest of the world knows about him? I just remember seeing Paul Correa and thinking, this guy's going to be a fantastic player. And I don't know how many people have even heard of him, but he was a lot of fun to watch.
Well, he came in an interesting era there. I think it was the small player was just starting to make a rise back into the NHL, because back when he came in as that freshman there in Maine, it was still a big boy game. I mean, there was clutching and grabbing. It was physical. There wasn't much room out there to skate for these smaller players. And when he came in, he kind of changed that in a sense. Like guys like Martin St. Louis came in just a little bit after that.
Like a college player.
Yeah, it's just they were too small, they were undersized, and all of a sudden now that's what it is. It's all about speed. The game, the NHL is all about speed, and just like fantasy football, things change constantly, and we have to adapt to them. Much like myself here, Scott. Can I cheat off you again during the Fantasy Football Expo in the Kings Classic? Because that'd be fantastic, because we've seen how my rosters went, and I think I missed both playoffs. I missed the one playoff on like a 3-way tie.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other I missed by like a game or something like that. So I'm going to have
the goal is to have competitive teams, and then you hope to get a break when you get a chance. Oh, by the way, just one other thing too, as far as growing up, I want to also mention I grew up with the 1980s NBA, and I had a special affiliation or affinity, botching two words, but the 1985-86 Celtics were just an unbelievable team to watch. Larry Bird has won his third straight MVP. They won their second title in 3 years. And every so often, just go to YouTube and look up, if you're not familiar with Bird or Magic for that matter, just look up a clip of these videos and just look at the way they pass the ball. I don't know if you saw that pass that Jokic made a couple days ago. That just reminded me so much of a play Bird might make or a play that Johnson might make. Totally out of structure, a play that just happened. The touch passing that Bird would make, just the ability to dream and see spatially. I grew up in an era where Wayne Gretzky was coming into prominence, Mario Lemieux was coming into prominence, and I've always thought in sports one of the coolest things is the cool pass. And so again, when I saw that Jokic pass, I thought, oh, this is like something Bird would do or Magic would do. Not in any way trying to diminish Jokic being an unbelievable player, because he is, and he would be great in any era. But when I get bored, I go on YouTube sometimes, cook up some 1985-86 Celtics highlights, the best passing team I have ever seen.
And I don't think people give Bird the credit for his grit. That dude was just so he just willed his way through so many different things. Like, oh, he can't make that. Oh, what? Whoa, he just made that. Or he can't make that pass. He's just like one of the toughest players to ever play in the NBA.
We just watched The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. Everyone's like, oh, he's competitive. He's an asshole, whatever you want to call him. Larry Bird was every bit as much of what Michael Jordan was. I mean, I remember this, and you probably know this being in that Massachusetts area. He basically hurt his hand. The reporter's like, well, you're not going to be able to play. He goes, I can beat you with my left hand. He taped it up, and he beat him with shots, shooting just with his left hand, took like $100 from him and stuff like that. And then I think he tucked it into his sock for that game or something, played the game left-handed. So
you got that totally right. That was Dan Shaughnessy's story. And I guess I'll give you one more just nugget from my childhood. I grew up reading the Boston Globe sports section, which was unbelievable. Peter Gammons, my favorite sports writer of all time, was their baseball guy. Bob Ryan was their basketball guy. Jackie McMullen at one point was on the Celtics beat. I wrote her a letter once with an article idea, which was probably like 3 years behind the times. And she wrote me a very nice handwritten note back when I was a total nobody. I'll always appreciate Jackie McMullen doing that. Shaughnessy was an interesting guy. I used to like Shaughnessy. He kind of turned into a troll at some point in the middle of his career. But the story you tell is completely right, that the Bird, the ultimate trash talker, is like, Shaughnessy, they may have even called him Shank back then. I could beat you with my hands taped together. Takes 160 off Shaughnessy and then stuffs it in his sock and plays the whole game with that money in his sock. Shaughnessy actually wrote a book recently about his time covering the Celtics. I think it's called I Wish It Could Have Lasted Forever. And there's some really good stories in there. And, Bird, ultimate trash talker, Bill Walton loves to tell this story. I mean, Walton would say, Bird would tell the other team to play. Bird would say, oh, I'm going to come over here. You're going to have to run a pick. I'm going to take the ball here, and I'm going to stuff a three-pointer in your face. And they wouldn't know how to take that. Is he really messing with us? Is that really the play? And then they would do that. And Bird was so competitive. Another favorite Bird story of mine is one time Wayne Gretzky went to see Bird play. The Oilers were in town to play the Bruins either the previous night or the next night. And Gretzky's all excited to play Bird because at that point they're at the peak of their games and they're linked together and stuff. And Bird gets ejected in the first half of the game. And after the game, somebody tells him, oh, did you know Gretzky was here today? And he starts swearing at the reporter. He's like, why didn't you tell me that? I never would have gotten ejected if I knew Gretzky was here to see me. He's like, you idiots. Blaming the media for getting ejected. But, man, Larry Bird was one of a kind. He goes into the locker room for the three-point shooting contest. Who's playing for second? And then he jacks up the final shot, and it's in the air, and he throws up the number one.
I was just about to tell that story. I was like, he made the three-point competition the equivalent to a slam dunk competition, because a slam dunk at that time was like God. Other than that, you didn't watch All-Star Weekend, but now we only watch All-Star Weekend for the three-point contest, and Larry Bird is a big part of making that happen.
I'll give you one more clip I want you to look up with. If you're not familiar with this, look up the duel, the fourth quarter playoff duel that he had with Dominique Wilkins.
Oh, yeah.
They were just going back and forth, and Dominique, I think, had 47 that game, and Bird's hitting lefty runners. It was just unbelievable. Game 7 of a playoff series.
Yeah. And
Wilkins at the top of it. Dominique was phenomenal. He's a guy who may be a little bit lost to history, but the most exciting, even more than Jordan, I think he might be the most exciting dunker in game that I ever saw in that era. But Wilkins and Bird just trading haymakers back and forth in an unbelievable Game 7 of a playoff series. It definitely holds up.
Man, I'm like 1 second away from throwing away all of our questions and just let you talk about sports, dude. You're like right in that era where I was growing up, and man, you're bringing back so many good memories. But let's talk about you a little bit more. let's talk about a decision that changed a trajectory of your life, and you can't say marriage or birth of a child.
Well, what changed the trajectory of my professional life and ultimately has given me so much happiness. I was a newspaper reporter, and internet comes around mid 90s, online services. You go to the bookstore and they try to give you the AOL disc. I got on a online service called Prodigy. I thought it was just so amazing that I could know the baseball box score in the first or second inning. I have to have this. Tied up my phone line for like 3 years on the modem. And oh my God, I got a 9600 modem. I can call up this box score in like 15 seconds. It's awesome. I mean, it would seem prehistoric now. So I was early to the internet, and I was early to message boards and, stuff like that. And so I made some connections. I was starting to play fantasy sports, and it enabled me to, throw out some feelers for some side hustles. Oh, maybe this website, maybe this newsletter. People had newsletters back then. They might need a writer. That's how I got involved with. I'm so glad you guys are sponsored by Fantasy Points, by the way, because John Hanson was one of the first people who gave me a chance to write. And I have great relationships with Hanson, with Joe Dolan is one of my best friends in the industry. They have an all-star team. Graham Barfield, Scott Barrett, Kaplan, Greg Cosell is second to none. Tom Broly is excellent. And the show that Paul Kelly and Joe Dolan do on Sirius Radio on Sundays is fantastic. At some point, I always listen to a little bit of that if I'm going to grab a sandwich or something. And I can't say enough of how much I really love the team over there. But the game changer for me was getting on the internet early, and then getting to know John Hanson early, getting to know the RotoWire guys early, and just saying, hey, I'm a sports writer. I'm a fantasy player. I know a little bit about this. Will you give me a chance? And, they did. It led to more opportunities. So, because I was passionate, I grew up loving sports anyway, and loving statistics and collecting baseball cards and stuff like that. When I found out that fantasy sports existed, first I got into fantasy baseball. I'm like, wow, I can apply this to something. This is awesome. This is like the greatest thing. And fantasy football, the whole idea of, okay, I can take fantasy baseball, which I love, and I can condense it basically all into one day. And everything's going to happen on Sunday, and my head will just be swiveling for 6 hours. This is like the most unbelievable thing. And what this is a sports bar where they show every game? This is actually realistic. It just blew my mind. So to me, the game changer was Prodigy, was getting online early, and then getting, John Hanson was originally a newsletter guy, and then he got the website and everything.
Wow.
And I'm forever grateful for the opportunities he gave me. And it led to other opportunities. It led to a RotoWire opportunity. Then I went back to John for a while. I eventually got to Yahoo. But to me, getting that modem and getting on Prodigy and being online maybe 4 or 5 years before most people were, that was the thing that changed my life.
Wow.
I love listening
do
to
you
those
mind? Do you mind giving us that year?
I probably got on Prodigy in 1994.
Oh, okay, man, that's a great story.
I love
Go
it.
ahead, Matt.
We've had some of the Mount Rushmore, the Hall of Famers, Paul Charchian, Bob Harris. They've talked about the fax machine days. They talked about the newsletter days and how the Wild West of fantasy football, how that path was forged. And then, like I said, we've had Dolan and Hanson, Barrett, Barfield, all on this show sharing their experiences, which, like you said, you don't know where those connections are going to come from, right? It could be a simple conversation like this, and then it moves into something else. You got involved earlier on the whole age, sex, location type thing, chat boards and stuff like that.
ASL
days.
So funny.
And that's kind of, and then those interactions kind of led one thing to another to where you are today. Well, anyone who's listening to the show right now, one of the common themes of this Behind the Grind series has been making those connections, networking, because you don't know what one thing's going to lead to another. And you know what? These connections, they're fantastic. It's something that continues to grow, much like the Fantasy Football Expo there. I mean, by the way, nice little segue here. Fantasy Points is actually sponsoring one of the party nights there this year at the Fantasy Football Expo there. Bob Luggs put together quite the little shindig all together there in Canton. It was my first time down there when I met you there in the Blanda division, but just kind of talk about your experience in that draft, in that live draft, as opposed to maybe online. I think I was in the Len Dawson online division for the internationals the year before because there's no get together there. But being in that draft room, in that Blanton room, kind of give us a little talk about that. And then how you see this expo growing as we move forward, and how impressive it is with the fantasy football community getting together in one spot each and every year.
Oh, it's awesome. I can't say enough to Bob Lung for what he's created. The perfect spot, right? You're at the freaking NFL Hall of Fame, right? So you have the whole history of the game, and it's all celebrated for you, and all those great videos and exhibits and the uniforms and the photos and the NFL. I don't think I'm saying anything revolutionary here. They before every other sport figured out how to preserve things on video and how to add music and how to slow down things. And it always bothered me. It took a long time for Ed Sable and Steve Sable to get in the Hall of Fame. In fact, Steve Sable,
Right.
the two NFL films guys, Steve Sable didn't even get in the Hall of Fame until after he died, which I think is just a sin. Because one of my things, and that's why I've always been jealous of, Hanson knew Sable a little bit. And a lot of those fantasy points guys, back when they were the fantasy guru, they would hang out at NFL Films sometimes. Obviously, they have the connection with Cosell. And they talk about, what a great guy Sable was. I always wanted to meet Sable one day and just say, man, thanks. Thanks for making me love football. Thanks for making me see how magical this game is and care about the history and all that stuff. It's just an amazing place. And so Bob Lung comes up with this idea, a destination, right? Here's a place you want to be because you love football. Here's a place you want to be because you meet people from big sites, from small sites, from new sites, from old sites. It's all of us hanging together because we love fantasy, because we love football. Maybe we have a drink together. Maybe we play some touch football together, whatever. It's just a bunch of different people meeting, exchanging ideas, making connections, and then ultimately a lot of us end up working together. We'll come on different shows. I'll come on your show. You'll come on my show, stuff like that. It's what it's all about. Life is about relationships. Life is about what we share in experiences. It's not about stuff. It's about the people you meet and the people who matter to you. And so, what Bob has created is fantastic. It only gets better every year. And it's just a place to, again, you see your old friends and you make new friends. What's better than that?
I love that because first time I met you, and then Mauricio there, he hung out with us in their draft room right next to us.
Awesome guy.
One of the best guys out there, man. It was such a pleasure to get to know him. Jim Coventry gave me a ride over to the Hall of Fame. When I landed in Cleveland, I literally hopped on into a vehicle with two people that I have never met before, but I kind of knew them from Twitter. We drove down from Cleveland to Canton. I mean, that's just kind of what it was all about. I mean, I probably wouldn't recommend doing what I did to my children and kind of saying, hey, just jump into some cars with some strangers and see what happens. Probably not the best thing. Major, we've been doing this show for a year now. That was the first time that we actually got to meet each other in person, was at the expo there. So that's some good things. Let's talk about your journey a little bit there. We talked about the message boards and this and that. What are some of the biggest changes now compared to when you first started?
Yeah, when I first started playing fantasy, my fantasy baseball experience goes back to the late 80s. We kept score by hand. The first fantasy baseball season I had all the stats on an old word processor. When I first started playing fantasy football, the scoring was very basic. It wasn't as intricate as it is now, but me and the commissioner of the league, this guy named Mike Washburn, we used to score by hand and then call each other on Monday and compare the scores. And like we'd always, laugh at the other guy if we had a cleaner sheet than he did, because we'd always miss something. You'd miss a 2-point conversion or something. But so it used to be score by hand, run the league by hand. If you wanted to see if somebody was a free agent, you had to scroll through a bunch of different papers and all that stuff. The internet was certainly a game changer for that. And one other guy I want to mention, I talked about being on Prodigy. I met Dan Williamson, who you may know. He's in the dynasty space. He's in the fantasy space. I met him on some message board in the late 90s. I think we might have been in the fantasy football league together on Prodigy. And the year Randy Moss was a rookie. Mm-hmm. And I know that Randy Moss obviously was great in college at Marshall and everything, but he was drafted to a Vikings team that already had Chris Carter, already had Jake Reed. And this was a different era. Teams didn't use 3 receivers like they do now as a base offense. It was kind of something you went to once in a while. So it wasn't clear, okay, well, Randy Moss, how effective will he be rookie year? How much will he play? Stuff like that. Williamson says to me, he writes me an email. He says, they had a practice today where they did red zone drills, and Randy Moss scored 7 touchdowns. Like, please draft this guy in every one of your teams. He's going to be unbelievable. And I'm like, I love him. He's his third receiver. He's like, just get him. He's going to score double-digit touchdowns. I promise you that. he emphatically just pounded. And this Ross was going to like the 10th, 11th, 12th round. I mean, it was unbelievable how late you could get him. And of course, he blew up fantasy. He was on the cover of the Fantasy Index the next year. But I don't even remember what the question was. But yeah, Williamson, man, great guy, doing great work for fantasy. What did you ask me originally?
The biggest difference between now and when you first started.
Sure. Well, as I said, we were scoring by hand. We were running leagues by hand. The internet changed everything. And, back then, and I guess this ties into my Williamson story, when I first got into fantasy, you could beat people with just information. Okay, so I knew Dan Williamson, a Minnesota guy. He was my Vikings guy. If I needed to know anything, is Robert Smith hurt? Is there going to be, what's changing with this team? Are the cornerbacks hurt, whatever. He'd know that. Now with all the really good information that you can get for free, and there's a lot of great premium sites too, you can decide if you just want to get free information, you'll get good stuff. If you want to get premium information, you'll probably get, better stuff. But now the information is so much more available to everybody. The worst player in your fantasy league is so much better than they were 20 years ago. It used to be if you just bought the USA Today, I used to talk about, I'd win my fantasy baseball leagues a lot because I would read the USA Today in spring training and see these notes and look at the spring training box scores. And most people wouldn't have access to that. They just wouldn't bother with it. Or maybe they didn't know that information was available. Information is all over the place now. I think you beat people now more on how you play, right, and not because, I got information that somebody else doesn't know. I think the information edge has really whittled down to just about nothing now.
Man, you tell like the best. You're a good storyteller, dude. You must be a writer or something.
I appreciate that.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to make like fantasy sports more than just a hobby? Like, and what were you doing at that time? Like, what job, like profession were you doing? And you switched over to doing the sports full time.
Yeah, the way it worked is I was, again, a newspaper reporter. I was a sports writer, and I was in one industry that was going arrow pointed down and one industry arrow pointed up. Okay, so I'm a newspaper guy, and that industry is kind of going downward, and I'm having trouble getting a great job. I worked for some great papers, and I had a blast doing it, and I learned so much doing it, and made some awesome connections, and learned how to write and how to edit and how to work on deadline. Those are all really important things, and I look back on that time really with much just fondness. I still miss just being in press boxes and stuff like that, which was really cool. But the newspaper industry didn't really understand how to adapt to the internet era. And so I was doing this fantasy stuff. I wrote for Hansen for a couple of years. I did some side work for RotoWire. As I proved my mettle with them, they gave me more and more responsibilities. And then RotoWire, they got bought out briefly by a parent company, and they moved their headquarters to Los Angeles in 1999. They offered me a full-time job. So at this point, I'm living in New England. I'm working ostensibly as a newspaper guy. Fantasy is just a hobby, but it's gotten more and more progressively a bigger part of what I do. Now somebody's saying, okay, well, let's do it for full time. And it required, moving completely 3,000 miles to the West Coast. I actually thought about it. We went back and forth about what my compensation would be. And I remember they made me an offer. It wasn't it was what they could afford. They weren't a big company and everything. And it was a little bit less than what I actually wanted, what I thought was maybe justifiable to move across the country. And so we made a deal. They said, okay, well, why don't we try you out for 3 months? And if that works out, and if you fit, then we'll meet the number that you want. And I wasn't asking for anything crazy or anything, but I wanted more than they were offering. So I went out to LA and just said, I'm going to make it impossible for them not to give me the deal that I want. I'm just going to basically be the hardest working person they ever met. And so for 3 months, maybe to my detriment at times, I just basically lived at the office, in part because the internet access was so good. But man, that's so newspapers were kind of going the wrong way. Internet was taken off. RotoWire they were the guys who invented the note, the fantasy note. You could just click and say, okay, what's wrong with Barry Bonds? Why didn't he play today? Oh, he's got a hamstring injury. You could research all this stuff. They invented that industry. Obviously, a lot of people do it now. The guys at RotoWorld do a great job with it. There are others, but really lucky again to get in early with smart people, with visionary people. Peter Schenke, Jeff Erickson. The guys at RotoWire were really good to me. And so I said, okay, newspapers. I don't think this is going anywhere. Internet, fantasy. It seems like it's taken off. Let's get on that train.
How many people told you that was crazy? How many people were like, oh no, that's some fantasy crap, but you need to stick with the newspapers?
Well, the problem I had with the early sites I worked for, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, but when I would tell them like, oh yeah, I'm doing some work for Fantasy Guru, they'd say, what's that? I'm doing some work for RotoWire. What's RotoWire? You know, people didn't know who they were. And back then, even fantasy football. Now, if you mention fantasy football anywhere with strangers, people know what you're talking about. And most people you talk to would probably have some experience with it. If they don't play it, certainly, you know, their partner does, or one of their kids does, or their father does, whoever. They know somebody who plays it. They play it in their office. It doesn't matter. Everybody knows fantasy football. That wasn't the case in the late 90s. It was still kind of a niche thing. And the great thing about fantasy football, the reason why fantasy football is the greatest sport, is that you can get in at any sophistication level. I mean, one of the problems with fantasy baseball, it's such a commitment, and a lot of people are intimidated by it. That they don't think they can handle it for 6, 7, 8 months, or whatever baseball season turns out to be this year. Where fantasy football, yeah, if you want to play it right, you're going to be engaged every day. But you can be in a casual fantasy football league and really just check in on your pickups day and check in on the game day, whatever. You can get in at different levels of sophistication, and that's why it just blows away every other fantasy game there is.
Yeah. This question right here, I think you're going to knock this next question out the park, and I'm just so excited for this question because you've been in it for so long. But what's your favorite league? What's like your favorite? Like, you know, everyone has like a home league. And I kind of want to like twist this question a little bit. Like, what's the oldest league that you're still in?
Well, if I can just incorporate that to any fantasy league, I'm in a fantasy baseball league that goes back to the early 90s.
Nice.
And we still have, I would say, I know I'm talking too much because my throat is sore. Give me a second.
That's right. Major's used to me talking all the time too. So
Right.
I mean, it's we're used to someone talking. Usually, it's me that's running my mouth the entire time. So don't
But
feel
yours,
bad at
but
all.
when you talk, man, it doesn't really make sense. Scott I'm like sitting here just like hanging on every
I'm telling
word.
you right now, that's the Canadian to American translation. That's why you don't understand the words that are coming out of my mouth.
Maybe it's the extra U that Matt's putting next to the yo. Maybe that's it. So we get this fantasy baseball league. It goes, but we call it the Chelmsford League because it was formed in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. None of us live in Chelmsford anymore. Shout out to Larry Holt and John Greco who formed that league, and some of my oldest friends, Scott and Steve Gleason, are in that league. Don Port, just awesome guys. Robbie Tuzet works for the Fantasy Channel on Sirius. Could not be a better guy. About 85 to 90% of the original managers are still in that league. Oof. There'll be a draft late March. We'll all go back to New England. My buddy Steve Gleason, his band will play that night. So what is a fantasy league? It's a social network, you know. It's a way, as we all used to live in the same area. Now we're all over the place. You know, Don's in Atlanta and John's in San Francisco. I'm in Michigan. Some of those guys still live in New England, but we all get together. You know, one of my partners in that league is on Long Island. But we all get together at least once a year. We haven't always been able to do it in recent years with you know some of the things that have happened in the world. But we're all going to get together in a couple of weeks. We're going to draft. We're going to make fun of each other. And at the end of the night, we're going to go watch Steve's band play, and they're going to tear it up. It's like, what's better than that?
Not a whole lot, but the one thing I do like is off-season power rankings. Now, I don't know if you had an opportunity to get to your power rankings here yet, but I have a very specific power rankings that I want you to kind of break down for me here. Now, it is going to be, I need your bar/pub shuffleboard pairing power rankings. And why is the combination of Behrens and Erickson the consensus number one group?
You've gotten really bad information. There is a very hot bar shuffleboard circuit, and I'm just going to tell you that the Hall of Fame pairing is Brad Evans and me, and we were famous for holding court at the I think the Daily Pint was the name of the bar in Santa Monica, and we held that that table for the whole night. I think as a team, Brad and I were something like 14-1 over a couple of different meetings. It was the first time we went there. It was great. The actor Jason Patrick was playing bar shuffleboard, and I had maybe a couple of drinks, and we were hoping to play. And so I went up to Patrick and I said, "Hey man, how you doing?" And at the time, he had just had an Entourage cameo. So I went up to Jason Patrick and I said, "Hey, I loved you in Smoke Jumpers," which was the fake movie that he worked on Entourage. And he laughed. And I asked them, hey, we're looking to play some shuffleboard. Are you guys going to be playing for a while? He said, oh, no, this was our last game. And so we talked for a couple minutes, whatever. I walked away, and I guess he went to shake my hand or give me a fist bump or something, and I didn't notice it. And I walked away, and I guess the way it was explained to me is it just looked like I was big time. And I'm like, okay, I'm done with you, Patrick. And so my Yahoo cronies all cracked up, and
And that was such a clutch move how you introduced yourself, though. Like, that was so clutch.
He was actually really cool. He was he couldn't have been nicer. But I was, again, we were the drinks were flowing good that night. But you talk bar shuffleboard, Evans and I will take on all comers. And I know when it comes to like self-promotion, nobody's going to touch Brad Evans because nobody can. He's awesome. Brad's an old friend of mine, and he's been really great to me. One of my former colleagues at Yahoo, who's now doing great stuff for Bally Sports. He obviously started the Fade the Noise Network. I mean, he's one of one. There's nobody like Brad, but you want to get beaten at bar shuffleboard. You come see me and Evans, and we'll take care of it.
I think we can arrange this. I think we can arrange this in Canton. I mean, I know Behrens was there last year. I know Evans was there. I know you were there. I mean, this is something that's very plausible. We can make this happen. We can get another like shuffleboard night going on for us who aren't going to be playing touch football. Because I can't get I could probably find a way to get hurt playing shuffleboard, to be honest.
I'm excited about the poker tournament too. I think the football guys and shout out to Joe Bryant, who could not be any nicer than he is. Just one of my favorite people in the industry. And there's so many great guys at football. Sigmund Bloom, Pat Fitzmaurice. You could talk for 20 minutes about just what a powerhouse football guys is. But yeah, the poker. The drafts, the auctions, hopefully the bar shuffleboard. I'm in for all that.
Nice. So if you weren't in fantasy lexicon, or if you weren't a writer, what would you be doing?
It's a great question. Maybe a teacher.
But what kind of what course? What's the name of it?
Discipline.
There you go. Discipline.
Writing teacher, an English teacher, something like that.
There you go. I don't know. That seemed like a cop out. It still sounds like you're writing. I don't know.
See, I was thinking more towards maybe a gym teacher, a little bit of a shuffleboard curriculum, maybe even a little bit of a golf curriculum. I mean, speaking of golf, have you kind of fine-tuned that swing into like Danny Noonan quality yet? Are you there? Are you there with Danny Noonan?
I'll never be there with Danny. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one of my favorite things about Caddyshack, which almost nobody mentions, but of course the great Matt Donnelly has mentioned it, that Michael O'Keefe's swing is unfreaking believable. It is just gorgeous. It's like a poem. It just flows. Not to mention he's got the great hair too. It's it's like, I love golf, and there's been some great golf movies. But you watch Tin Cup, and you can see that Kevin Costner, although he's a great athlete, he's a very natural baseball player, does not look like a natural golfer. And they had to kind of change the story to like, oh, he plays in West Texas, and he has to hit the low shots and all that stuff. But Danny Noonan his swing is gorgeous. And I'm glad you mentioned golf, because Pat Fitzmaurice and we've been talking about, we want to get together and play some golf. And we might even go to Canton early for the expo. And sneak out for a round in the Canton area. So I would love to have the Danny Noonan swing. I'll tell you what, though, my game, which had been pretty stagnant. I know nobody is tuning into this to listen to my golf game, so I'll make this very quick. But I'd gotten kind of stagnant in golf. I was good, but maybe took it too seriously when I was younger. And then I got older and just kind of got, okay, I'm not that great, but I'll just enjoy it, have fun with my friends. The last couple of years, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'd like to be better than I am. I'm not breaking 90 anywhere near as often as I think I should. So I got to work, I got some wedges, I took some lessons, and just started my swing from scratch, and just became in love with the process. Right. I mean, so many people talk about this, and look, I'm just got better at golf. I haven't, I'm not going to go on tour or anything, but when you fall in love with the process, whether it's, fantasy, whether it's, you want to grow a garden, you want to learn how to cook, whatever it is, you want to work on, car mechanics, it doesn't matter. If you fall in love with the process, anything is possible. I went from somebody who hated the driving range, you couldn't pay me to go there, to all of a sudden I knew everybody at the driving range. I found a place 5 minutes from my house. It's a great place to work out. It's a good place to clear your head. All during the pandemic, that was my safe haven. I just go there and hit a bucket of balls and try to stick that wedge as close as I could to the flag. And I want to get better at golf. Man, get some wedges, get those distances dialed in. I mean, I probably shaved 5-6 strokes off my game in the last couple of years.
Nice.
Well, I hope you didn't become stagnant in golf because Lou raised the price of Coke, because that would not be a good thing. Right?
You are hitting all the right tones, because that's one of my favorite throwaway lines that nobody ever mentions. Lou raised and you know why he raised the price of Coke? He's been losing at the track. That's so beautiful. I mean, whatever he's losing at the track, he's not going to make it back getting an extra 15 cents from Cokes. And then of course he said, I'm not paying that price for that Coke. You ain't getting no Coke. And then he takes a sip of himself. I love that. Oh, he's so great. Lou raised the price of Coke. He's been losing at the track. What a great.
Yes, we were talking about soda there. For those that are listening here right now, we were soda for Coke. Here's one of our favorite questions, because it's a little bit of a deeper type question here, but it's like fantasy sports teaches a lot about each other and, more importantly, about ourselves. What's something that fantasy sports has taught you about yourself?
Well, for one thing, it's been a great outlet for my competitive nature, and I'm appreciative for that, because the great thing about fantasy is you can get a lot of bang for your buck. And I think at one point in my life, I needed that. I needed to have something competitive that wasn't necessarily going to be a danger to me. So there's that. But, it teaches you about decision-making. It teaches you about sportsmanship. It teaches you about, human behavior. What is this market going to do? What is my opponent likely to do? How much of my fab budget do I have to spend to acquire this player? There's a lot of poker elements to it. So to me, it appeals for so many different reasons, because I think it's fun to try to out-scout people, out-manage people. And my favorite thing, people a lot of times look at their favorite fantasy teams. Oh, yeah, there's that time I had 4 superstars on the same team. Last year I had Jonathan Taylor and Cooper Kupp, and I traded for Deebo Samuel, and I had Mark Andrews, and I crushed everybody. I'm not saying that isn't fun. But for me, the most fun is when you have the better team and I beat you. There's one year, my friend Mark Stopa and I were in a playoff league. He was running a high stakes league. We met in the semifinals. He had the best team in the league, and I had just a bunch of scrubs. And I had to pick up Matt Castle as my quarterback that week, and I picked up Jordan Todman, who was like a 1-week rental at running back. And again, Stopa had a juggernaut. His team was so much better than everybody else's. And I just got hot that week and beat him. And he every once in a while he'll say, "You beat me with Matt Castle and Jordan Todman." He's like, "What the hell was that?" That to me is one of the joys of fantasy. But again, I love it because it fuels my competitive side. It's just fun to match wits with people. I love the poker elements of the game. I love the subtle strategy of the game. I love how the cadence of a week. You have a Thursday game, you have the early games, you have the late games, you have the Sunday night game. Sometimes you have to make adjustments on the fly. Sometimes you have to play for upside because your opponent looks stronger. Other times you have to do the conservative thing because you built a lead. I just love all those different elements of fantasy. It's such a fascinating game.
So just to kind of go on that a little bit more, when you're competing against experts, everyone's got their own set of rankings. Experts out there, they've got their own articles, they've got their own stuff. They pay attention, but not a whole lot of attention. When you're playing in those home leagues against, relatives, buddies from high school, this and that, do they use your articles, your rankings against you?
Oh, they do, for sure. For sure. There's a guy named Peter Morris who was in a fantasy baseball league of mine. Great guy. He's written a bunch of baseball books. I think he was a Hall of Fame voter at one point. And we would do this fantasy baseball auction in Michigan with a bunch of guys. And there was a magazine I was in. Peter Kreutzer runs the professional fantasy baseball and fantasy football guide, where one of the things they do is they get a bunch of people in the industry and you submit picks and pans. The picks of the players that you're telling people to draft and the pans of the players you're telling them to avoid. You submit as many as you want, 5, 10, 15, 20. And then you open up the magazine and it says, Tyreek Hill, and it says, okay, pick for these 3 guys, maybe a pan for this guy, whatever. So I show up at this fantasy baseball draft one year, and Peter Morris has gone through this magazine and called every one of my picks and pans and put them on a mimeograph sheet and handed them out to everybody. And every time the player came up for auction, he'd say, "Oh, wait a minute. This is a Pianowski pick, Tim Anderson." And he'd read the thing out, and they'd all have a great laugh. So, that's, who can make fun of you better than your friends? That's what you want,
Absolutely.
right? That's the fun. This is the good stuff. You want people to make fun of you. You want people to take advantage of you in that way. It's all about having a good time.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like me spending $20 on Sterling Shepard in our auction draft there at
oh man,
the Expo.
Yeah, you mentioned Matt Castle. Fun fact: I grew up playing Pop Warner football in high school against Matt Castle. He's a good dude, man.
Was an
But from
underrated player, by the way. I mean, the year Brady got hurt in 2008,
oh yeah,
they went 11-5, and they were smashing teams at the end of that season. Go look up what they did to Arizona. In the Cardinals, that was the year, the Fitzgerald year, right? That's the year they went to the Super Bowl. They played Arizona late in that season and beat them in the snow like 47-7 or something like that. The Patriots were one of the best teams that didn't make the playoffs. They were 11-5, and they lost on a tiebreaker. I think they could have won the AFC had they made the playoffs. And Castle had a great season, ended up leading to him getting a really good deal with the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, Matt Castle in our Pop Warner All-Star game. Matt Castle was an offensive lineman, and I was a running back on that team. But yeah, man, shout out to the Chatsworth Chiefs and the North Valley Golden Bears, man. Man, Scott, you taking me all the way back, man. All these great stories, man. But for my last question for you, can you give some? I mean, you've been giving great advice this whole show, so I hope people are like really grabbing those gems. But can you give us some advice for those of us trying to make it in the industry?
Sure. It's about relationships. Usually the simplest way to write something is usually best. Um, Read different people and get different viewpoints, but just develop your own style. You don't fall into the trap of trying to write like Matthew Berry or trying to write like Brad Evans. Write like you. Um, and if you're having trouble getting started with an article, write the middle of it. Write what you know. Write what you saw. Um, you don't have to. A lot of times I'll have the ending of an article in mind or the middle of an article in mind, and I'm not really sure what the hook is at the beginning. Find different things, activities that spur your mind. Sometimes a long shower will give me a good idea for an article, a long car ride. I'll go on the driving range for an hour and I'm like, oh, I have a great idea. This is a tight end article I want to pitch to my editor. And shout out to Jason Klabaka, my boss and editor at Yahoo, who's a wonderful guy to bounce ideas off. Have people, talk to your friends. Bill Simmons used to say he used to write every article like he was writing an email to his best friend, which I think is a great tip. So just a few ideas to keep in mind.
Great advice.
I love that. I usually try and write an article the way I speak, and my editor absolutely hates it.
It's like 1,000 A's in there. Like
when you write the word A-E-H in your article, it really throws people off.
Hey, you're finding your own voice, right? That's the whole idea. Find your own voice.
It's like the old ski team, the crazy Canucks back in the day there when we talk about the Olympics there, the downhill boys. But hey, you know what? We've kind of come up on that hour, 10-minute mark here right now. Scott, we thank you so much for joining us here. Just kind of let everyone know, we know you're at Yahoo. We know you got baseball on the mind, maybe kind of depending on what's going on here. And then I think Manfred just canceled some games or is on the verge of canceling games. So this could be one of those ones where they dig their heels in pretty deep here the next little while. But hey, let everyone know where they can find you, what you're up to, what are you kind of coming on the horizon here, what we can look forward to.
Sure. Well, fantasy baseball is open for Yahoo if you do want to draft. I'm confident there's going to be a bunch of games this year. It may not be 162, but there's too much money at stake. I think they'll probably play a 5-month season or something like that. So just pretend it's February 1st instead of March 1st. You can find me on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski. And I'd love to talk to any of your listeners. We can talk movies, we can talk music, we can talk different sports. You want to talk golf, you want to talk basketball, hockey, it doesn't matter. Certainly we can talk football, but I have a bunch of different interests. You want to share me a dog photo, any of that. I just, there's the big world out there. And that's why I think baseball really will be making a mistake if they nuke a bunch of their season, because there's so many more things to do now. We have so many options. There's so many channels. There's so many different streaming services. We can watch all this European soccer if we want to, motor sports, whatever it is. So, I think baseball might be underestimating just how ready people are to look away if they don't have a product. But I'd love to talk to anybody about whatever, and you can disagree with me. You don't have to agree with me on stuff. I think one of the best ways to learn is find the smartest people you can who disagree with you. And that's how you learn stuff. So I welcome the conversations. I've really enjoyed talking to you guys. This is a great show. And, let's keep doing it. All right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I appreciate that there. Major League Baseball lost me back in 1994 when they stole the World Series from my Montreal Expos. And it pretty much killed my Expos on that day.
What a team. Pedro Martinez and Larry Walker and Ken Hill and John Wetland was his lights out closer. Marquise Grissom was the center fielder. What best team in baseball? We'll never know. Would Tony Gwynn have hit 400? He hit 394 that year. We'll never know. Would Matt Williams maybe have hit 63 home runs? We'll never know. How
do you remember all this stuff? He's just like off the top of his head, no notes, is like running off all the players on the team.
Kind of a famous
awesome, dude.
Me, but again, I was into stats before they had any application. I can remember Jim Rice, 1978. He hit 315, 46, 139.
I can't remember my phone number. Like
nobody knows anybody's phone number.
When kids were reading Franklin and Friends, Scott Pianowski was reading the sports editors section of the newspaper. There's the box scores each and every week.
I just picture a little kid with like some coffee and a newspaper.
I would get the paper and get a bowl of cereal and spread it on the living room carpet and just devour that section, man.
Dude,
I would just read it cover to cover. And again, I know I mentioned them earlier, the Boston Globe. I can never thank them enough for being the perfect influential thing to read when I was a kid.
Yeah, I blame the Medicine News. If I actually had a better newspaper around here to read it, who knows what could have happened. Maybe I would have learned how to read and write a little bit better than I did. But with that all being said, this has been the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast, episode 115, presented by the Fantasy Points Media Group. Head over to fantasypoints.com right now. You know they're good people. Scott Pianowski's basically said they're good people over there. Enter promo code Viper22. Get 10% off that subscription today. You will not regret it. And what you won't regret is heading over to Apple, Stitcher, whatever else we got going on there. We're everywhere. Any kind of podcasting platform. You'll have the whole show right there. Or head to the Vipers Network, where we'll break this into 2 parts for your viewing pleasure. So if you get sick of looking at me after 30 minutes, turn on a new video. We'll come right back at you in a 2-part here for the Behind the Grind. And, Scott, again, thank you for your time. Greatly appreciated. Very educational. And we will have to do this again. And hopefully we get back together in Canton here this year. I've already got my hotel booked there at the DoubleTree. So, because the cookies there, second to none. World's best cookies at the DoubleTree in Canton, Ohio.
You have problems, Matt.
I'm a fat kid, okay? That's what we do. It's food first, okay? Food first.
You can't blame somebody for eating cookies. I mean, look, I grew up with Sesame Street and Cookie Monster, so I'm not going to knock the man. And by the way, I'll close with this. You said, what would I be doing if I wasn't, in this fantasy game or writing, whatever? My dream job growing up was I wanted to be a writer for Sesame Street. That I loved the way the program was ostensibly good and decent because it wanted to educate kids and give them esteem and all that. But at the same time, it was trying to wink at the adults and some of the double jokes and all that stuff. And I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be silly for a living and yet know that I'm doing something for the greater good. So that my dream job was to work for Sesame Street. I'm covering fantasy sports. Not that far of a stretch.
That's cool. And I got a new nickname for you, Matt, the Canadian Cookie Monster.
There you go.
I'll take it. Hey, with that all being said, let's sign off with this. We are out of here in 3, 2, 1.
You guys so much.